Welcome to another edition of In Conversation with DLC's Chief Economist, Dr. Sherry Cooper. I'm your host, Eddy Cocciollo, President of Dominion Lending Centers, Inc. Today's edition is brought to you by FCT. DLC has over 4,000 mortgage professionals across the country to help you with your finance needs. Visit dominionlending.ca to find a mortgage professional near you. Our Chief Economist, Dr. Sherry Cooper, is one of the most highly respected economists in Canada. Today's episode, we'll be taking on more of your questions. No surprise to us that the Bank of Canada paused rates today. There is a lot of questions out there on what that means and what to do. Although there isn't an absolute answer, we hope that by answering your questions, we can help you make a better informed decision on what to do with your mortgage. Today is International Women's Day. To all you incredible women out there, I want to thank you, especially my mom. Love you so much. Also to Sherry for the many years of her contributing to society as a woman of influence. We appreciate her very much. Now, we did have some technical difficulties with Sherry. She is trying to dial in. We will get to Sherry's presentation as soon as possible. As you guys know, today is all about you and your questions. Please have them ready for Sherry. You can even send them in now if you have them. And David will queue them up. He's in the background there, our producer, and he'll queue them up ready for Sherry when she does come on. So I get to fill in until she gets back. So if you have any questions for me, please send them and I will do my best in answering them. If you are a purchaser or you want to refinance, there's a lot of questions about rates. They do have, the rates themselves on a variable rate side or an adjustable rate side has not changed, which is good news. This is the first time in quite a while that we haven't seen the Bank of Canada make a change, actually 8 straight changes, believe it or not, until today. Now, do we anticipate more increases coming? That's going to depend on the data that comes through. We're talking about inflationary data. We're talking about employment data. We know our friends to the south of the border yesterday mentioned that most likely they will be raising rates, which will be interesting on the pressures that the Bank of Canada will feel if the U.S. is raising rates and we're not. You probably saw there's some pressure on the Canadian dollar. That will continue. There's pressure on gold as folks go to the U.S. dollar. So there's a lot of pressures on different areas, and it's going to depend on some of that economic data that's coming to see where we're going to end up. Couple of reminders just for our next ICW call as we're waiting for Sherry. It's actually pretty exciting. We're going to be live at our national conference in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. And yes, it will be before the next announcement, but there is lots of data, economic data coming in before that session, inflationary data, also employment data, and of course the US and what they're going to do with interest rates. So Sherry will have lots to talk about and probably a good idea of what the Feds are going to do come April for if they're going to raise rates or not. So that's going to be exciting. It's going to be live. Sherry will be actually on stage. So we'll have her on stage presenting, and please join us. It's going to be an awesome ICW. And just a reminder, that will be on April 4th. So April 4th, I believe it's the same time, David. Dave, is it the same time? Let me take a look here. Actually, it's 10:30 a.m. Eastern. So it will be actually a different time. And it's probably, there it is, 9:30 Pacific, 12:30 Eastern. I was looking at Mexico time, I'm sure. So please tune in for that. I think it's going to be a little different spin, just like today was supposed to be a little different spin with questions. So let's see if there's any questions out there yet for me. None. Obviously, Sherry is much more important than I am on your questions, but she will hopefully dial in soon. Is that a flip-flop event? No, Jason, it will not be a flip-flop event. It will be part of our DLC day, and it will be in closed doors in a conference room with a beautiful stage. I'm sure lots of sound and light and exciting stuff. Aton. Let me talk about Aton Pinsky for 1 second, because I think a lot of you may have heard the name before if you're part of DLC, and Aton sends out an email around this time, and it's very informative. And I was just looking for it now. And Aton, I love what you said. And if you don't mind me taking a couple of seconds here about birthdays, because my birthday is coming up. It's on March 12th, so I'm hoping I'm getting a call from you. But I just wanted to read what you said in your email about birthdays, because there's a birthday that you want to celebrate today for Ben K. And you said, I love birthdays. I personally make it a mission to call on birthdays. Why? Because no one gets calls anymore. And that's so true. We would rather say happy birthday on Facebook or IG or on TikTok or other stuff. I think a personal hello and happy birthday goes a long way for a person receiving it. I know I love getting calls on my birthday. I'm sure your clients would love it too. That is like so true. And that's, something that you could be doing, while you're trying to get in touch with your clients, a simple call to say happy birthday. Love that. Just thought I'd bring that up. Now I know how I'll be dressed. Yes, Dom, you will be in a suit and tie. I hope, maybe a tuxedo. That would be awesome. We send handwritten birthday cards to all of our clients. Oh, that's beautiful. That was from Megan Walker. A great touch. And even a better touch is write their address on the envelope. Handwrite the address on the envelope. Not many get that in the mail anymore. They're usually printed or a sticker. So that's a good one too. You may end up getting 1,400 calls on March. Hey, Martin, I don't mind. 1,400 is a nice number. I'd love to get 1,400 calls. What else can I talk about? Any ideas? Sherry, I'm sure, is frantically looking to come on the call, and this is a good practice for me on filling. There she is. Thank God. I was drowning, Sherry.
Yeah, I'm here. I don't know why this has been. Okay, trying to share my screen. Just a second.
Awesome. So, Sherry, I just mentioned it's International Women's Day, and I just wanted to personally say thank you for all you do. You are definitely a woman of influence. Lots of people love you, so I just wanted to say thank you on this celebratory day for women. And you're frozen. Oh, and you're back.
Thank you. Wow. So you guys can see it, yeah. But there it is. Yay.
Okay. So as you can see, Sherry is cutting in and out, and we apologize. Yeah, Sherry, you're cutting in.
It's working again. Oh.
Yeah, so Sherry is cutting in and out. So hopefully, I'm sure Dave is working with Sherry to ensure that. Yes, you are. You're cutting in and out. Maybe it's that Florida warm air that's interrupting your internet connection. Could be that, or it happens. Yeah. Okay. I love that Carlos sent the question to Sherry about Bank of Canada following up Fed eventually and raising rates more, asking because the current disparity of monetary policy and the effects on the exchange rate in Canadian versus US. Sherry and I discussed that a little bit. We definitely don't want to contribute to inflation, and that could contribute to inflation if the Canadian dollar stays low while the US dollar comes out, rises. So I'm sure Sherry will expand on that, but Carlos, yes, you're right. That pressure will be on Bank of Canada if that disparity does widen and put pressure on our dollar for sure. God love technology. We understand it happens in this new world we live in. Yeah, it's unfortunate, right? I mean, we've had such a great run with Sherry and technology. It's unfortunate, especially on today when we had a special episode of taking your questions, and we had some live videos from some of her biggest fans that were going to ask her questions too. So there she is.
I think. Okay, now I hope this is going to work to share mine again.
Okay.
Mama's to try, but I will do it and share screen. Got that.
Dog just said, I did see a balloon outside. Might have been a birthday balloon, but we can't be too careful. Awesome, Dong. I can always count on you for entertainment. Maybe you should come into my office, Dong, and we can do something together. Maybe ask each other questions or something while Sherry gets set up.
I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I'm in as far as Dave, where are you?
Well, here's sort of the good news. If we can't get Sherry to get her technology to work, the next ICW is not far away, and everything that she says and does will be brand new, and it might be okay. Turn off your video, maybe. There's the presentation. Do you want to try talking, Sherry? See if we got you clear.
Hello, I'm here.
Yeah, you're still cutting in and out, Sherry. Yeah, it's still cutting in and out, unfortunately. Really unfortunate. And there's an echo, they're saying. Okay, so Sherry, do you want to try and see if you can go through some of your slides?
But it's StreamYard that's having a problem.
Could be. It could be.
StreamYard is the one having the problem because it's not connecting properly.
Okay. Yeah, we're not blaming anybody. We're just having technical difficulties. Yeah, I'm here.
I don't know what else to do.
Yeah, neither do I.
Is there a way I could call in and just talk?
Dave, what are your thoughts on that? Can we just take the questions for Sherry and just have her talk? Oh, he's probably put you on your cell. Yeah, I wouldn't know how to do that, Dave, but Sherry, do you want to just take questions and see what we can do here? I'm going to call your cell. So Sherry, I'm going to call your cell right now, and then we're going to put you on speaker, and this is how we're going to do it. And we're going to take questions. This will be really old school. So I'm calling you now.
Yep.
Okay, so
can you hear me?
I can. So you're going to have to mute your screen.
Okay,
so
can you hear me?
Yeah. So mute your screen. I'll use my phone as our voice. So you just turn down the volume of your screen or your computer. Just turn it down to 0 or mute it.
Just turn it down to 0. Okay.
All right. Here we go. Okay, so
do that. I haven't done that yet.
Okay, so we're gonna or do you want to go through your slides and do it through my phone?
Do you want to go through your slides? Sure.
Okay, so Yeah, before we do that, just turn down the volume of your computer. So just turn it down to 0 or put it on mute.
Okay. I'm on mute.
No. Your computer itself, so that we don't get the feedback.
I can see you now.
Yeah, so your screen or your computer just needs to be, just put the volume down to 0.
Okay.
There we go. Perfect. Okay. So this is going to be cool, I think. So let's go through your slides, see if that works.
Okay. All right. So what are we doing here? Well, this is completely crazy. The Bank of Canada, as everybody knows, refrained from raising interest rates again, first time in 12 months that they haven't taken every opportunity to raise rates. And the primary reason why they have decided this is because that fourth quarter GDP figure turned out to be flat, no growth at all, 0%. And at the same time, the inflation numbers did come down. So they told us they would pause last month, or the last time they met, and indeed they did. Now they're forecasting a mild recession. Will they get it? That's the big question. And the reason it's a question is because the labor markets are still red hot. And we are going to see another employment number this coming Friday. So we're only 2 days away from it. And what the bank would like to see is the unemployment rate tick up a little bit. Now, the unemployment rate is a mere 5%. That's the same as it was in December. That is very close to that 4.9% that we saw in the middle of last year, which was a record low. So the Bank of Canada and many economists are expecting by the end of this year that the unemployment rate will rise from 5% to 5.8%. Now, will that happen? And that, of course, we don't know. What we've seen so far is that labor demand has slowed in Canada, but it still remains extremely high. This chart shows you the share of total jobs that are unfilled. So it's come down from that huge peak we had just a few months ago, but it's still, as you can see, historically very, very high. And this is exactly the same thing that the Federal Reserve says that they're waiting to see. Now, the other big factor, the big unknown, is inflation. In Canada, we have seen the CPI inflation number coming down. And so inflation has fallen for the last 3 months considerably, from 6.8% 2 months ago to now 5.9%. Now, will that be sustained? And that's still way above the 2% target that the Bank of Canada has. And so the question is, will they in fact get what they want, which is that inflation will be down to 3% by the second half of this year? Now, though the Bank of Canada did pause its rate hikes, they continue quantitative tightening, which means that they're selling off a good amount of maturing bonds on their balance sheet. And in any view, I think there's no chance the bank is going to cut interest rates this year. In 2024, should things turn out as they wish and inflation does come down to 3% this year and headed for 2%, then we'll see rate cuts next year. Now, here I show you what the Bank of Canada has done, dramatic increases over the last 8 meetings by the Bank of Canada, where the overnight rate increased from an amazingly low 25 basis points up to 4.5%. And I've also charted here the inflation numbers as they are coming down, which of course is very good news. But there's a fly in the ointment here, and the ointment only began yesterday, or at least the fly arrived yesterday, to keep the metaphor going. Yesterday, Chairman of the Federal Reserve, the Central Bank of the United States, Jay Powell, he did testimony before the congressional committees, and yesterday and this morning. And Powell said that given the strength in the U.S. economy, given that labor markets in the U.S. are extremely tight, and that the U.S., in one measure of U.S. inflation, has picked up recently, what they're seeing is that interest rates, he believes, will rise faster, meaning the policy rate, and they call it the Fed funds rate, which is the same as our overnight rate. And currently it is around 4.5 to 4.75%. They are saying, Powell is saying, that rates will rise faster to higher levels and remain there longer than expected. So it's the minute he said this yesterday, bond markets around the world sold off and the U.S. dollar strengthened sharply. And then this morning, when he testified again to the Senate, and the Bank of Canada at the very same time announced that they were pausing rate increases, the Canadian dollar fell sharply. And currently, the Canadian dollar is near its lowest level in the past year. So now the reason that's concerning is because as the Canadian dollar weakens, commodity prices rise in Canada because they're all priced in U.S. dollars. And secondly, it means that the price of things that we import from the United States also goes up. So that's not good news for the Bank of Canada. We've seen as well in the last couple of weeks that the 5-year bond yield has been rising. Another concern, because that led to an increase in mortgage rates a week or 2 weeks ago. But, this is a volatile series, and we'll just have to see what happens. Now, the Fed meets on March 21 and 22. That means the announcement will be on March 22nd, and we'll see what they do. There's even speculation now that they may raise the overnight rate by 50 basis points, whereas they only increased by 25 at the last meeting. As in both countries, the yield curve has become sharply inverted. So what we've got is that shorter term rates are way above longer term rates. In the US, it is a record level of inversion, which is typically predictive of a recession. And we do know that Jay Powell will not be satisfied until the unemployment rate in the U.S. rises meaningfully. And the same is likely true in Canada. And then finally, of course, we've seen this big housing correction. It is not a collapse, and house prices are still above the levels that they were before the pandemic began. But the home resales, the existing home sales, are at recession levels. And that's directly a function of the sharp rise in mortgage rates that has reduced the number of buyers. Many buyers are waiting for interest rates to fall. And it's also even put many of the sellers on the sidelines as new listings, of properties have been very moderate. So the numbers of properties for sale are still below the long-term average. And there's been relatively little forced selling. This shows you how much prices have declined by region of the country. The GTA is still the largest declines, although the most recent data, which would be for February, we're beginning to see the different regional real estate associations announce that for Toronto, sales appear to have picked up. Vancouver, they've been up a little, but still, they're certainly not about to increase dramatically. As well, a big story is that many of the variable rate mortgage borrowers have hit their trigger points. And we've seen the reaction of the banks. The banks, in fact, many of the banks that have the fixed variable rate loans that allow the borrower to have a steady monthly payment. Many of those are now that interest rates have risen so much that people are paying, in some cases, only interest and maybe not even the full amount of interest. So the banks now are allowing negative amortizations until renewal. And the question will be, what happens at renewal? As well, you see that for TD, CIBC, and BMO, where they've actually announced the data, the proportion of their remaining amortization on their mortgage book has increased to a very high level, over 30% for these banks. And now, what BMO has told us when they reported their earnings last week is that 20% of their mortgage book renews in the next year, and they say that the contract will revert to the original amortization schedule when they renew, which means, of course, much bigger monthly payments. That, if nothing else, will certainly slow the economy. Now, we've got another thing that is a big unknown, and that is what action will OSFI be taking. OSFI is listening to the views, and the comment period doesn't end until mid-April. But at that time, my guess is they're going to be talking to the banks about the remaining amortization levels and discussing how to reduce the risk to the banking system. Now, I don't know what they will do. No doubt, all they're concerned about is the health of the federally regulated financial institutions. They are not worried about the affordability of housing or the ability for buyers to do transactions in the marketplace. Finally, I do think that there is a sun out there, down the road. Housing activity is likely to rebound. It may already be beginning to do so. After all, once we get into the spring selling season, it's likely we'll see activity increase. But we're not going back to where we were during the COVID period with exceptional increases in home prices. Eddy.
Oh my God.
We can open it for questions.
Standing ovation. That was Honestly, Sherry, that was incredible. Only because I know that sometimes when you get flustered, it's hard to deliver. And man, you delivered. That was awesome. So we do have questions, and we have some questions for you from our biggest fans, or for your biggest fans. Our first one is from Jason. Jason Nugent. He's always so awesome, and his question is as follows. Dave?
Hey Sherry and Eddie, how you doing? Just wanted to record a couple of questions for you. Sherry, the first question was, how long can we hold off raising interest rates if the U.S. keeps raising them this year? And how's that going to affect the economy, people buying or us selling stuff there, and everything else? And the second question is the housing market being artificially propped up by allowing the variable rate clients to extend their amortizations beyond the normal levels? We're seeing that a lot through, CIBC just had an article, TD, RBC, all the ones that have the fixed payments. How is that going to impact things? And just get your opinion on that. Thank you very much.
Well, Jason, without knowing what the Fed was actually about to do, and you've asked the $65,000 question. No question, the Federal Reserve is determined to raise interest rates, and the overnight rate in the U.S. may well be heading for between 5 and 6%. Now, the U.S. economy is different than the Canadian economy. Our economy is much more interest sensitive than the U.S. because mortgage interest is not tax deductible in Canada, as we all know, and we have the longest fixed rate mortgage out there is 5 or 10 years, whereas in the United States there's the 30-year fixed rate loan. So individual households, at least in terms of their monthly mortgage payment, have not been impacted by the rise in interest rates in the U.S. Now, some do have variable rate mortgages, so that's not everyone, but by and large, it's the bulk of home mortgage owners. And so Canada's very reflective of big movements in the interest rates that we've seen. Our housing market was the strongest in the world, certainly in the industrialized world, when interest rates fell and fell and fell and fell. And similarly, we've seen a marked slowdown, but not a crash. Now, what happens? Interest rates increasing in the United States is a given. That does mean a weaker Canadian dollar. That in itself does impact our economy. And it's typically not good for the economy. It raises prices, or at least the prices that are posted in U.S. dollars or that are determined in U.S. markets. We've got to pay those prices, and it takes more Canadian dollar in order to cover a U.S. dollar at this point in time, and likely to continue to fall as we pause and the Fed hikes rates. How big a gap could we see between the two central banks? I think anything over 100 basis points, which would be 550 for the U.S. overnight rate, would start to make the Bank of Canada move away from pause and start increasing interest rates. The other factor about the amortization and the fact that the fixed payment variable rate lenders have kindly allowed those people that they lend to basically not cover any of the principal, and in some cases not even all of the interest. That obviously means that once they do renew, their monthly payments are likely to go up considerably, and especially so if the banks are required to return the amortization level to the original level. Now, right now, there's nothing that necessarily requires that, but that may be what OSFI has been looking at. Remember that the banks have been a key player throughout the pandemic. Remember, they were willing to defer mortgage payments in the beginning of COVID, and particularly during the lockdowns. Now, because the central bank and the Department of Finance were very concerned about instability in financial markets. So hopefully OSFI is still concerned about that and isn't going to force the banks to, in essence, tighten credit even more than has already happened by forcing people to make extraordinarily high monthly payments. And but I do think that for sure, the rise in interest rates, the full effect of the rise in interest rates have yet to be felt on the economy. That in fact, we will see a slowdown in economic activity. And whether it's a soft landing or a fairly significant recession is yet to be determined. So the answer is no one knows, but I wouldn't rule out another rate hike this year. I don't think it's clearly data dependent. I hope it doesn't happen. The only thing I rule out is a cut in interest rates this year.
So before you came off your technical difficulties, Carlos Lerma asked the same question, and it seems like our audience is very interested in that question because it came up a few times. So thank you, Carlos, and thank you, Jason, for that question. I just wanted to just like sort of shift gears here and talk about that OSFI rule. Do you feel like it's going to happen in April, May? Bob Reese is asking that too, and I'm curious because there is a lot going on. And if OSFI adds this layer, man, what could that mean for the housing market?
Well, I gotta wonder why they took the opportunity to make the announcement in the first place.
Yeah.
They've got to be, obviously they're concerned about the federally regulated institutions. I mean, that's their job, and that's really their only job. So they clearly want to make sure that the banks are not overly exposed.
Yeah.
And remember, they published a paper that showed that the proportion of loans outstanding to households with relatively low incomes relative to their mortgage has increased sharply over the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So that's the group that they're concerned about. And, I hope they aren't overly aggressive because it could be more tightening than we need, but frankly, I would have to think they're going to do something.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. Hopefully, they're paying attention. And yes, we want OSFI to be involved in ensuring that Canadians are protected, but we don't want to overshoot, right? So, our next question, I'm going to go back to a video question. This one's from Nancy. And she's a big fan as well. She wants to ask about the big R that may be coming up. So here's Nancy's question. Nancy Ingram.
Hi, Eddy. Hi, Sherry. This is Nancy Ingram. This is my question for Sherry. So a recession is defined by 2 quarters of economic decline. We've seen the start of that with the December numbers, but I'm not sure that is an indication going forward as consumer spending and employment numbers are still very strong. So that's my question. Do you feel that we're on that path to a recession, or are we starting the soft landing the Bank of Canada has been hoping for? If we are in that soft landing, do you think that we still should expect rate tweaks for the remainder of this year?
Well, again, that's another $64,000 question. We have to see a slowdown in the economy, given all the rate increases. Now, remember, the bank could hike the overnight rate again, but longer term interest rates could actually fall given the expectation that it causes a recession. And that's certainly what's happened in the United States. But I do think that regardless of whether they're forced to tighten again, if we don't see a slowdown in the economy, then they will necessarily start to increase overnight rates once again. Now, we have seen a slowdown, obviously, in business capital spending and inventory reductions and other measures of caution on the business side. We've also, of course, seen a significant slowdown in housing activity and even housing construction. But when it comes to consumer spending, particularly for services, there's still a lot of spending going on. And consumers stockpiled big savings rates, big savings numbers during the pandemic. And there's still apparently pent-up demand for everything from trips to restaurants. And so, and a labor shortage, so that it's really hard to get reservations, and the prices continue to rise, not to mention food prices, which continue their double-digit increase. And so this affects the poorest of Canadians the most, clearly. But it's, it's politically, nobody likes inflation. Maybe they don't like rising unemployment even more, but there's no other choice, particularly given that the federal government doesn't appear to be interested in tightening their policy. So they don't want to raise taxes and they don't want to cut government spending. So then that means that monetary policy is the only game in town when it comes to inflation.
Counting on the government, isn't that great?
Yeah.
Now, this is a question from Martin Teresa. It's an interesting one. I don't know if you know the answer, so we might be putting you on the spot. But she asked, can you remind us of what the national average of the overnight rate over 40 years has been? Can we expect it to stay around that average percentage this year?
Well, I haven't done the math to know that number. I can tell you that in the early 80s, that number peaked near 20% in Canada, a little less than that in the United States. But back then, and it has been a consistent decline ever since, up and down, but it has been coming down since then. I remember telling people that someday a 9% yield on a AAA Government of Canada bond will seem like a very high interest rate return to you. And that absolutely happened, and nobody believed me because nobody thought that we would see budget deficits turn to budget surpluses or that inflation would turn to deflation. Now, that's not going to happen again. We're not going to see inflation turn to deflation in the next 5 years. And so I think at the end of the day, meaning let's say over the next 5 years, interest rates will remain above the levels we saw prior to the pandemic. So we're not going to go back to those rates, but we will certainly come back from an overnight rate of 4.5%. But I don't believe it's going to go back down. It was 1.75% right before the pandemic, but that was when inflation was less than 2%.
Yeah. That makes sense. And I know that there's a lot of questions around taking variable versus fixed. I talked to a lot of very smart mortgage professionals at DLC, and it's a tough one, right? It's not one that you can easily answer. Obviously every situation has a certain amount of risk to it, or a certain amount of appetite for risk. And that's going to determine which one you take. There's lots of questions to ask before answers can be given, which makes sense. So our next question is actually from Monique, and she wants to ask about variable versus fixed. Here's Monique.
Hi, Sherry. Monique Marcotte from Dominion Lending Centers. I hope you're keeping well. Just wondering your thoughts on what you think the future spreads between variable and fixed could be once rates are neutralized in 2024. Do you foresee them being as large as they once were in the past, or do you think that's in the past? Thanks so much, and looking forward to seeing you at Inspire.
Well, thank you, Monique. I don't think we're going back to pre-COVID days. So I don't think that it'll be a no-brainer in people's minds that you always want a variable rate loan, because people have learned the hard way that interest rates don't only decline, that interest rates can rise, and certainly did. And remember that the war in Ukraine is still on, and the disruption in the supply chains have changed, and a lot of that is now reduced. But what's happening is many producers of goods are onshoring production, and that means more expensive goods. And it takes longer to produce them now because this is a whole new business. And the Chinese are even moving factories to Mexico to take advantage of American companies that no longer want to rely on China because what they've seen in terms of potential disruptions to their business. Now, a semiconductor chip that's produced in the United States is going to cost more than which was produced in underdeveloped countries. And so higher prices is the price we pay for this deglobalization. So I don't think that the coming decade will be one of dramatically falling prices the way the last decade was.
Sherry, did you just say that China is going into Mexico with factories so that they can still produce for the U.S.? Did you just say that?
I did.
Wow.
Yeah,
amazing.
Wow is right. And it's kind of scary because the Chinese have a wrap on most of the rare minerals that are absolutely needed for the production of electric vehicle batteries. And this is clearly part of the kind of competitive position that the Chinese has created for themselves, because they're very prescient. They started buying up cobalt from Africa and rare earth minerals and all kinds of other things years ago, before anybody in Canada or the United States really got serious about it. So this is still a great concern. And also another big unknown is this tensions between the Western world and China and what that all means. And clearly Canada is a big part of that as well. Also, by the way, some of the minerals and commodities that are needed for the production of electric cars are right here in Canada, right. And China owns some of that mining.
Right. Thank you, Canada government. So have you been following the water and carbon dioxide using wind energy to produce a fuel? I think Porsche is a big investor in this new fuel that uses wind turbines and draws the carbon from the air. Have you heard of this?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean it isn't a big story.
I know there's lots in your mind. Listen, I just, I'm a big Porsche fan, and that's the reason why I know about this fuel. But it is interesting. You should do some research. Love to get your there he is. I just thought, how does wind take carbon from the air? It's like, I'm not smart enough for that, but I haven't done enough research on it. But it's very interesting The only setback of that fuel is, of course, the cost of producing it. It goes right into a combustible engine. So any car that you and I drive with a combustible engine can use this fuel, and you get the same kind of mileage, the same kind of performance, but the cost of bringing it down, and it's got zero carbon emissions. But we'll get back to that in a minute. I want to get to our next question, which is from Kristen Woodward, who is also a big fan, and her question has to do with what you expect on rates. So here it is.
Hi, Sherry. I just wanted to say, first of all, that I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for all the industry insights you provide our network on a regular basis. It really does help immensely with conversations with our clients, and I just want you to know how much I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. My first question, and probably the most important, is, are you looking forward to cutting another rug on the dance floor at DLCG's Inspire in April? Secondly, after all of the conversations I'm having right now with my clients as to what to expect with interest rates going forward, with rates being so high right now, and after money being on sale for the last several years, I'd like to be able to know sort of what you feel we can expect going forward as the new normal, and that would be great. Thank you.
Oh, I'll definitely be on the dance floor.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, that's awesome. Yeah, it's those are two good questions, and we're looking forward to seeing you on the dance floor. I'm sure you're going to grab a lot of attention. But it's interesting about money being on sale. I like how she put that, because that's what it was. It was emergency rates. Money was on sale. Now it's coming maybe overshooting, and now they're like the grocery stores adding a bit of margin. but yeah, like, where do you see rates going? Where do you see them ending up? I'm talking, like the normal rates that we should be experiencing, because I think we're overshooting, and there's a reason for that, and obviously on sale. So what's the between rates, Sherry?
Well, it's interesting you asked that question, because at the next meeting in April, the Bank of Canada is going to release a report on what is the neutral rate of interest. In other words, what is the level of overnight rates that would be consistent with non-inflationary growth without overheating the economy. And, it depends on what part of the cycle you're in. The neutral rate, when inflation goes back to 2%, might be, let's say, they used to estimate 2.5%. I think it's a bit higher than that. But it is going to take inflation at 2% for that to be neutral. If interest rates were to go down to those levels now, it would certainly not be neutral. It would be highly inflationary and expansionary. So there isn't a fixed answer to that. And it's always an estimate, or if you really want to know, a guess. Because the way that economists at the Bank of Canada model the neutral rate is they use history to predict the future. And if we know one thing, we know that this has been an extraordinary period. Never before in history have we seen the exact combination of events that have occurred. Yeah. So, yes, interest rates ultimately will decline, but not now, and maybe not certainly I don't believe this year. And whether it happens next year or not, and how quickly, will depend actually on how much further the Fed increases interest rates, and how fast they increase them, and indeed how long they keep them there. The reason I say that the Fed is so important in this is because the U.S. represents our number one trading partner. The U.S. is, it affects people in Canada psychologically. If they hear bad news about the U.S. economy, they often dig in their heels and tighten their belts a bit, even though it may not even be relevant for Canada immediately. So we all know if the U.S. Begins to sneeze, Canada's going to get a cold or worse. So I do think that you can see the global markets have responded to what Jay Powell said in the last 2 days, and for good reason.
So we're going to take one more question. How is your arm? I know you do Pilates, so you're probably in better shape than most of us on this call, but are you okay? Can we take one more question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so this is going to be our last question. Thanks for your patience, everyone. It's actually ended up being a wonderful, wonderful episode. So this one comes from a Facebook user, so one of your fans that are anonymous. I believe the government held 60% of the bonds before they started to release back into the market. What is the number now, and what do you expect on that measure moving forward?
Well, I haven't looked at that data in recently, but I would bet it's down to about 45%.
Okay.
And it'll be interesting to see how far they go. In other words, will they go back to their meager holdings of government bonds that began the cycle before COVID became a fact? And so it's going to be very interesting to see how we return to 2% inflation and how long we can stay there and how aggressive the central banks will be in that 2% target. There were a number of economists that were trying to convince the Fed that 3% was the right target, not 2%. And I think that the central bank chairs all over the world basically said, no way. Because if you target 3%, it sounds like you're not all that serious about getting it down. Right. And, you have the base case is much higher. And that means that wages increase even more. Right. So they're not willing to do that.
Well, I must admit, I liked this style. I think going forward, we're going to do it on the phone. No, I'm just kidding, Sherry. But I do appreciate.
Oh my God!
I do appreciate.
I didn't tell you I'm never doing this again.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. But here's the good news: the next time we do this, we'll be in Mexico. You'll be on a stage. It'll be wonderful. Just a couple of reminders, everyone. There is a Bank of Canada announcement on April 12th. We will have our ICW just a week before that, April 4th. As I mentioned before, there's lots of data to come in. So Sherry will be able to analyze that data and give a robust new presentation on April 4th in Mexico. I want to thank everyone for your questions, especially the four, Monique, Kristen, Jason, and Nancy. Really appreciate your time. And until next time, we will see you in Mexico. Thanks so much.